Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Patsy. It's wonderful to be here today. I'm here with Charles, Paul, and Todd, and our 7 guests from all over the world. And they're also our community members. Our subject today is dehumanization and rehumanization. So before we officially begin, I would like to give my deep gratitude to our event committee, Paul, Michelle, Lee, Connie, Sherry, and Todd. Please say hi to them in the chat box and to each other, of course. So exciting. We plan on end our meeting today at about 4:30, and after our event ends, our community members can gather by clicking the community gathering Zoom link in the event post for further discussions face to face. And it will start approximately 15 minutes after the ending of our event. So now let's welcome Charles.
Hi, Patsy.
Hi, Charles.
Hey.
Yeah, so excuse me, give me a minute. I want to make sure that I have all these settings properly so that so people can see both of us. Here we are. Yes, it's good. So, so you hear that, Charles, we have 7 guests from all over the world, right? And
Yep.
I think that today's topic is very important to all of us. And personally, I don't subscribe to the divisiveness in races or nationality and cultures. However, I do want to acknowledge that my race has also been a target of discrimination. In addition to those typical situations, I have been frequently reminded by racism activists that because I'm not Black, therefore I could not possibly understand racism in the United States. And unfortunately, I personally feel that it's a kind of a prejudice thinking in itself. The reason why I mention it here is simply to point out that this sort of confrontation is only a smaller problem nested in a greater subject that we're here to address today, dehumanization and rehumanization. I'm looking forward to the insight and tools that you will be unveiling for us all. So thank you for being the conduit to bring understanding through responding to our guest's question. So before I bring up our first guest, could you share your opening thoughts on this topic of dehumanization and rehumanization? Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Patsy. It's something that I've been aware of and engaged with for a long time. I mean, going back to my childhood, even when I became aware of the racist and genocidal history of the United States, from reading radical literature and from the informal education I got from my father. So I've been, a long time interested in social justice, as it's called, racial justice, gender justice, and so forth. And more generally, like what unites all of these things is a fundamental belief that all human beings are equally worthy of respect, of dignity, and so forth. So anyway, and I don't think that's a controversial statement. And it's funny, like how divisive, as you were saying, Patsy, how divisive the issue has become when there's actually broad agreement on the fundamental idea that everybody is a equally valid, equally worthy, equally sacred, equally divine being. Like everyone agrees on that. So why is it so divisive? And there were some of the comments I saw about I just even saw something from Charles Barkley, the basketball player, who was grieving the divisiveness. So what's going on here? In fact, the basic pattern of dehumanization extends beyond just the things I mentioned: racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, ableism. There's all these isms that express one or another version of reducing people to less. And the pattern is even bigger than that. It also extends to the beings of nature and to ecosystems, things like soil, whales, birds, fish, that are made into objects in the reigning ideology. So what we do to nature, we also do to other people. And that's not to say that a bird is the same as a person, but it's more than a thing. So anyway, historically, I'm not going to go too much into the history, but one thing I want to point out is that when you reduce somebody to less than fully human, that kind of gives license to exploit them, to enslave them, even to objectify them, and that, if the most obvious example is slavery, and that's the race question in the United States is sometimes a little hard for people from other countries to understand. Like I have African friends who are like totally baffled. What they don't even understand sometimes the discourse going on here, because there's a specific history in America that is different to other places. But it's interesting that the origin of, well, one of the historical narratives that I looked into for a while, and I'm not like super up on these issues anymore, but at one point I was looking into it, and this is too detail level. Well, maybe I'll just mention it. It might feed in later. That racism was kind of invented in order to justify slavery, and not the other way around. It wasn't that Europeans like began by hating or thinking that Black people were less than, and therefore thought, okay, well, let's enslave them. It was that there was a powerful economic and political apparatus that was wanting to enslave people, and racism was used to justify that. So it's like, well, how can I justify exploiting this person, enslaving this person? Well, maybe they're not really fully a person. And this in general is what capitalism does too, by even like putting the category of consumer onto people, or worker, or that somebody is, somehow deserves their servitude, or deserves their tedious, degrading factory jobs, or deserves to get paid less than I do. Like this whole idea that some people are just less intelligent, less competent, less worthy, like less worth-y. This facilitates inequality in general. So anyway, it would take me a long time to say everything on my mind about the way that dehumanization works. But I'll just say one more thing. Well, maybe I'll save it for the Q&A. I think I'll just, maybe I'll just say just one more little thing and then go into bring people up. That I see like the basic template of dehumanization being adopted by people who are trying to heal or end racism by turning it onto the perpetrators, turning it onto the 1%, turning it onto the white males, and basically saying that in not maybe in so many words, but that these people are less than fully human in some sense. They have this label of perpetrator that you were born into. Like just by being born, you are guilty. And this can become an instrument for reenacting the dynamics of oppression, but with the roles reversed. And I think everybody can agree that that justice is not that the formerly oppressed get a turn oppressing others and everybody takes turns. We want to end oppression altogether. So, and I'll just also say that this issue is such a hot button topic right now that I want to encourage maybe you would call it a generosity of listening that isn't oriented on gotcha. You said some politically incorrect thing. Like let's give each other some leeway to explore things, say things, and take them back and feel them out and try them on, and rather than trying to dominate each other. So, yeah, want to bring someone on, Patsy? You're muted.
Thank you, Charles. That's so compassionate. I really love it. So our first guest is Michelle Haley. Hi, Michelle. Welcome. Could you tell us where you are at right now?
Yes. Hi, Charles. I'm in Mexico and Cuernavaca.
Oh, thank you so much. And I'll hand you over to Charles to present your questions. Welcome.
Thank you. And thank you, Charles, for this space of inquiry. I'm going to read the question I posted on NAS. So my question is for Charles, yet I'd also like to open it to this community to see if anyone has any ideas to better serve the healing process of someone who has been through many types of abuse. I've been holding an intimate space called Co-Create Creation with friends, family, and close connections, a space where we can interbe and tell our stories in a vulnerable, loving way. This space is held in reverence, compassion, and a love-heart connection as a means of healing. And one person in this group suffered horrific abuse as a child, and it has been extremely difficult for her to connect to the notion of compassion. She states that she has not an ounce of compassion for the person who so violently robbed her of her innocence, that she wants nothing to do with compassion. And I honestly feel that the question that we use sometimes, what is it like to be you, seems like a million leagues away. I sometimes feel that there's a time and place to ask it, and it's not always appropriate, or is it? My question is, after we've offered reverence, compassion, love as a means to accompany a complicated process, what else might help deepen healing? How might the group and I better accompany such a painful process?
Yeah, well, thank you, Michelle. That's beautiful. And thank you for doing that work and holding that group. That kind of healing is so important today. We need that times a million to change the ground conditions of our of our social situation. And Patsy, don't spotlight me because then I'm looking at myself. And anyway, so yes. So the person you're talking about, and this applies to anybody who still feels vulnerable to having been abused, having been oppressed. There's definitely on that individual level, I mean, there is definitely a necessary phase of taking back your power, setting boundaries, and putting that first. Compassion, but I think also, so like I want to just say that at the outset. And also to say that I am not advocating compassion out of any kind of moral should. It's not like you should be compassionate because then you're a good person. Compassion is the result of, well, it's both the cause and the result of seeing the full truth of a situation. And And the truth being that the reason that the other person has done what they've done is in large part due to their circumstances. There could be their upbringing, it could be the subculture that they're in, it could be the trauma that they've received, it could be the overall culture, it could be their economic situation, it could be they're living in fear of some sort. Usually it has something to do with their own trauma. And there's a very practical reason to look for those things, which is, if you don't understand the full situation, how are you ever going to change the conditions that continue to generate abuse and violence in the world? If you don't change the conditions and all you're doing is fighting the perpetrators, then you're going to get an endless stream of perpetrators. This is like the same mentality as in the United States, especially the criminal so-called justice system, where we have an endless supply of criminals and we just lock them up and lock them up and lock them up. And it seems like, well, you've created a boundary here, a literal boundary, and they can't harm anybody anymore except each other. But you haven't done anything to change the conditions that generate new criminals. In fact, locking them up contributes to the conditions that generate new criminals, because you're taking, you're tearing apart families, you're removing people from the community. I mean, the prison system does a lot of damage to society. And I think the same is true with, if say you are an abuser, you're a perpetrator, and you're carrying, like, it's usually not so simple as, ha ha ha, I'm going to harm somebody, I'm this evil person and I get pleasure out of others' pain. Usually it'll be like, and I don't want to generalize too much, but very often it's somebody in an outburst of uncontrollable rage will harm somebody, and then they'll feel terrible guilt and shame about that. And they'll vow never to do it again, and they'll apologize, and the abused spouse or the abused child will forgive them. But then, and they have every intention of being a good boy from now on, a good man from now on, but then something, in a few days, a few weeks, they lose it again, and it becomes a cycle. And eventually the abused person says, well, I have to set a boundary here. This isn't working. And that's true. It's not working, and they do need to set a boundary, but that isn't going to necessarily solve the underlying problem. And it's not for the abused person to look for that or to solve that problem. But as a society, when we see rampant abuse and rampant violence, then we can maybe offer the perpetrators our witnessing, offer them healing, offer them a relief from the inner persecution of shame and guilt, because part of them, they think that they're an awful person too. Underneath the rationalization, underneath the justifications, they probably feel terrible about themselves too. When have they ever been fully seen and fully loved? And if they were, maybe they wouldn't do the abuse anymore. So at some point, we have to let go of revenge in favor of healing, because that's really what we want. We want a world where this doesn't happen anymore. So compassion is practical. It's not letting them off the hook. It's changing the conditions. It allows us to look for how to change the conditions. And it's the truth. The diagnosis that they're doing it just because they're bad, just because they're evil. There was a book called Demonic Males about how male humans are just intrinsically brutal and violent. So this, there's a whole scholarship about this, but it's not true. Anyway, I don't want to go into that too much, but I just raised that as an example of this misdiagnosis of evil acts are caused by evil people. That is dehumanization. It's the same pattern as racism and the objectification of women and so forth. Is that helpful, Michelle?
Yes, it makes me think about something that Bayo Komalafe says, about dehumanization. And I'm sort of paraphrasing here, but that something is mutually broken during trauma. No one gets out of this intact. And so I thought that was really interesting. And also, Dana Wilde responded to my question on NAS, and she offered a really brilliant response to the thread that's really worth the read. And she offers like an alternate question, and that says, what is it like to be me as a child? Which I thought was also really, really helpful in this inquiry.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just in general, whether we're talking about victims or perpetrators, I think the stories need to be heard. I put that in my invitation as well. Like Black Lives Matter, Me Too, they were bringing into visibility stories that society had been suppressing. You know, it's not like all of a sudden in 2016 that women were being abused. It's that they were finally speaking up. It's not that police just started killing Black people and whatever, you know, it's been happening for a long time, but now it's coming into visibility. And I often think, like, how many like white anti-immigration Trump supporters would hold their views if they really could hear the stories of some immigrants. The only reason that you can be like xenophobic, anti-immigrant is if you don't understand why these people are so desperate that they will leave at great risk, leave their homes, leave their countries for a totally uncertain future. Like, if you actually heard these stories, then this dehumanizing thing about, oh, you know, illegals and stuff, it would be impossible to maintain it. So I think that I mean, the basic principle is let's get to know each other more. Let's put down our judgments and be willing to see each other in our full humanity.
Yeah, thank you, Charles. Yeah, thank you, Michelle, for your great questions and also directing us to Dana's comment. We'll for sure check it out. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so we're gonna introduce Kenny from Canada. So I've been, I know Kenny a little bit now through interaction, and Kenny, to me, he's like a pioneering healer, you know, he's there with us, everybody, you know, thank you. So I'm gonna hand you over to Charles and ask your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patsy. I have to live up to that. Thank you, Charles, for holding this space, and Patsy and everybody else. Thank you, Michelle, for giving me the permission to also read my question. So here it is. I totally agree that rehumanization is key to fostering understanding and connection around these contentious issues. This helps heal the human dimension of these issues. But another important aspect of these problems is the systems we've inherited that support these dehumanizing conditions and offer so much resistance to change. Language, cultural standards, justice systems, so many other factors hold together these systems of oppression in ways that are barely visible to most. I'm still coming to grips with many ways in which I've internalized racism, and I'm doing my best to lovingly hold these parts of myself without blame or shame. And I've long protected myself from the pain, the anger, the grief that comes with these dehumanizing conditions by basically turning a blind eye to most of the aspects of these things and suppressing it, as you named, Charles. And I suspect that a lot of us, there's a lot that we don't or won't see because we've lived in this story of separation all of our lives. And there's a lot of pain that we don't necessarily feel ready to take on. So how do you suggest we keep ourselves and others accountable enough to bring impactful changes to the systems while also avoiding dehumanizing the people and the parts of ourselves that strongly resist and don't see the benefits to the change?
Okay, well, there's certainly a lot in that question, Kenny. It looks like you've thought really deeply on this. maybe I'll just say a couple things that come to mind. I'm not sure if it's directly answering. Yeah, maybe I'll talk a little bit about systemic racism and systemic injustice. One of the problems with the idea that racism happens because there are these bad people called racists is that, so a lot of white people, especially those who would call themselves conservative, they're like, well, I'm not racist. Like, I don't hate Black people. I don't fear Black people. I have Black friends. I don't think, like maybe my parents or my grandparents thought that they were inferior and should be kept separate and so forth, but I don't think that. And that experience makes them doubt that there even is such a thing as systemic racism. However, it's also indisputable that, like in North America, people of African descent have, lower income, lower wealth, higher rates of incarceration, more chronic disease, like all these things, like they're definitely worse off. So people who reduce racism to a matter of personal animus are incapable really of understanding that or of thinking that that's a big problem. And if you are a compassionate person, you have to understand that that's a problem. Like we don't, and I think here's another thing that would be universally accepted, almost universally accepted, is that we want all of our brothers and sisters to flourish, to experience opportunity and justice. And purely out of that impulse, let's do something about this. Not necessarily out of, we're the perpetrators and so we need to be punished. And we need to pay damages and need to it doesn't have to come out of that kind of guilt. It can come out of compassion for our fellow man and our fellow woman. Like I don't want to live in a world where people are suffering in this way. So I think that it's ironic that I'll just say it again, that the narrow diagnosis of racism as being caused by racist individuals actually perpetuates racism. It perpetuates systemic racism. And as for what to do about that, I mean, then we do get into what you might call reparations, but not in the sense of punishment, in the sense of repair. That's what the word actually is supposed to mean. How do we repair the damage that has been done? Yeah, so that's what came to me in the first half of what you were saying. Do you want to chime in again and
Yeah, what's missing for me? And I really appreciate everything in that answer. And I think compassion is definitely essential. I'm wondering, given our propensity to not see, and even myself, there's so many blind spots that I still harbor regarding race and gender and so many things. And the need to actually change these systems and impact them. How do you suggest we navigate that? Because compassion is one thing, but I can't be compassionate for what I can't see.
Yeah. So this gets into, a psychological or a spiritual question too. Like in general, what prevents us from seeing? I think especially in this arena, a lot of it is a false self-image and an attachment to seeing the world in a certain way and being right about my beliefs about the world, and therefore my beliefs about myself, me as good guy, me as moral, ethical person, me as a smart person who understands the world. As long as I'm attached to that, I'm going to have a disincentive to see anything that violates those images. So for me, it's about, so then the next question of compassion is, well, why would I hold on to those things? Why is it so important for me to be right? Why is it so important for me to look good? Why is it so important for me to signal virtue and get the approval of a certain set of people? Why? Well, then it comes down to self-love and self-acceptance. Again, it comes down to some kind of trauma, because an infant has no problem with self-love, no problem with avoiding pain, seeking pleasure, being nourished, playing, having fun. The infants do not have a self-esteem problem. Something happened to you, to me, to pretty much anybody in a modern civilization to damage that natural, innate self-love and eagerness to be embodied and to avail oneself of the joys of this world. Something happened to us. And if that doesn't change, we're going to continue to have polarization. We're going to have blind spots. We're going to have prejudices. We're going to have mass hysterias. We're going to be controllable by totalitarian governments. We're going to be susceptible to cults. We're going to be susceptible. I mean, we're not going to be free and able to see what's true. So it all comes down to, I don't want to say it all comes down to one thing, but it's so tied together, this personal healing and the social healing, the healing of the mind, the healing of the body. Yeah. And you also asked, like, well, what do we do? How do we navigate it? What do we do about it? Maybe on a relational level, on a social level. Like politically, I think that when more people see with eyes of compassion, the problems won't be that hard to solve. You know, like, I mean, just imagine what society would be like if we took in North America $1 trillion of military spending every year and another whatever $500 billion in prison spending and turned it towards social healing. Our problems would go away very quickly. It's not hard to solve. Once we turn our incredible human energy and creativity toward caring for each other, loving each other, devotion to each other, I mean, we would be in paradise in 5 years. So that's where it comes from. And yeah, maybe I'll leave it at that for now. And is there anything you want to say to close it up?
I have a thought in mind, but I'd rather not, because I think it would probably open it up further, and I want to leave space for the others. Yeah, but thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you, Kenny. You know, I'd love to reconvene, and maybe you can add that thought as a post in NAS. I personally would love to read it. And also, Charles, I want to add one thing. When you talk about infants and young children's, you know, how they are, one of the things that came to mind is infant and young children, they don't seem to hold grudges. You know, they forgive really quickly. You know, they fight in 1 minute, and then the next minute they were playing again together. And I think that has, you know, we can learn a lot from it, or I can learn a lot from that. Yeah. So thank you. Our next guest is Ellison. Welcome, Ellison. So Alison is from Ireland, right?
I'm living in Ireland. Hi, Patsy. Living in Ireland, but I'm an imposter because I'm from the UK. But I've been living in Ireland for the last 12 years. Yeah.
So welcome.
Thank you. So thanks, Patsy and the team, for organising this and inviting me. And Michelle and Kenny, such great questions, and the answers already have fed so much into what I wanted to ask. My question feels really self-indulgent because it's a very personal question. And just to keep the reading the question going, I've been enjoying practicing the internal question, what is it like to be you, in the context of being able to be more present with and welcoming of opinions that differ from my own. And it's been a huge game changer, so thank you for that framework. But recently I've been called to grow in a personal situation where I feel I'm the one that's being dehumanized. And whilst I'm doing my best to apply that same question to the other person and be compassionate and open, it's much more challenging when I feel threatened by the behavior and fearful, not in a physical threat kind of a way, an emotional threat. So my question is, what strategies do you use to remain open and compassionate and gracious when you feel that you're being discredited? And how do you decide it's time to walk away from the table?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe you can learn from my mistakes. I tend to be rather conflict averse. So sometimes when it's the moment where I should really stand up for myself and say no, or fight back or walk away, I don't like even walking away. Well, are they going to be okay? You know, are they going to be upset with me? Are they going to like, so there's a kind of a fear there. And rather than face that, I go into like this fake compassion, fake kindness. Well, you know, like let's give them another chance and try to understand and say the nice thing, but it's not actually coming from compassion. It's coming from submissiveness, or it's coming from conflict aversion. So compassion, or this question, what is it like to be you? It doesn't have to result in yielding or compromising or giving way. It could be the insight that you get from that is, wow, this person is not going to give up until I give them a hard no. That might be the result of your understanding. And it could even be, I will be doing them a favor by ending this toxic dynamic by walking away or by saying no. So this is really important, that, and it applies more generally too to you know, race or gender issues. Like compassion isn't submission. Yeah, it's quite simple. Mm-hmm. Is that helpful?
That just totally speaks to me, the desire not to walk away because I must be able to find some way of fixing the situation. And yet, as you say, if the behavior is toxic, there comes a point when, out of self-respect, I have to say no. And self-care, and what you touched on about trauma as well. I think sometimes it's my trauma that's keeping me in a situation when maybe I need to say no. So thank you. Really great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, great. I'm glad it was useful. Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people, I mean, hopefully it's not just me and you, Allison, who, you know, have this tendency and we're like the total wusses of the world. But I think a lot of people.
I'm going to raise hand too. I'll join you.
Yeah. So yeah, should we bring up someone else now?
Yes, thank you, Allison. See you soon. Next person is, our next guest is Sebastian. Hi, here you are.
Hi, Patsy.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
So where are you from?
I'm from Norway. I'm calling from Bergen in Norway.
Oh, is that the Viking country?
Yeah, that's the Viking country.
Why
Yeah.
you have the beard?
One of them. Yeah, might be.
Namaste. Okay.
Yeah.
Enjoy your talk.
Thank you. All right. So hi, Charles. Thanks for having me on. And my question is about how the healing of the world will come from the margins. I think, yeah, it's kind of a mess. So I'd like to read a little section from your book, The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible, and then kind of put some different things on the plate, and then you can do whatever you want with it. So you say on the end of your book, do not imagine, though, that it will be the West that rescues humanity from the various civilization it has perpetrated, haplessly floundering, pithing the invisible habits of separation. We cannot undo a civilization based on separation. Our healing will come from the margins. When I was in Colombia, I thought, here are people who haven't forgotten so much how to be human. They are spontaneous, they hug, they sing, they dance, they take their time. And that, yeah, just that section really caught my attention, because I've also, well, spent some time in Colombia and Brazil, those two countries particularly. And I just really, yeah, resonate with that idea of them having what was kind of missing in my own country. And the way I see it is kind of, I don't want to focus too much on Norway, but it's kind of the pinnacle of the Western model, kind of the alleged success of the Western model. And so the people in Colombia, for example, would be like, oh, wow, you're from Norway, it's so great. Whilst I was thinking, you know, oh, we have so much, we have more to learn from you than you have from us. And here it's kind of the poverty of the rich that you also talk about in your work, the lack of community, lack of love, lack of meaning, and this spontaneous, way of life. So my question is, what can be done to help, for example, a country like Brazil to stop reaching for the destructive Western model of life? And how can we harness the precious memory of these people who have not completely forgotten how to be human? And I know that you were recently in Brazil, and if you have any observations about how you see people acting out, like now also during the pandemic, any thoughts? And yeah.
Well, the first step would be to stop actively destroying them through the international debt system. If you want to talk about preserving the beautiful things of their culture, you got to look at what's destroying them. And it is globalization and development along a certain model that sucks the wealth out of these countries. It's a imperial model. So that's like on a macro level, that's got to stop. And then also the arrogance underneath it, underneath the whole paradigm of development, where Norway is a developed country and Brazil is developing and Somalia is undeveloped, that says that their glorious destiny is to someday be like Norway because you're the best, you know, or the United States is the best. Like, to let go of that arrogance and see, and just like what you were saying, like, wow, here are some people who haven't forgotten how to be human. Maybe we should be learning from you. Maybe we should be imitating and learning from the best things in your culture, and not coming in there with this white man's burden attitude of, we're going to lift you up to our level. And like this arrogance, like, what does it take to let go of that? What does it take to step into humility? I think that it kind of goes back to the other thing that I was saying about facing the truth. Like, it's not working. The modern program of progress, of technology, of control that was supposed to bring us utopia is not working. There was an interesting thread on NAS about psychiatric medication, you know, and some stories were starting to come out, really powerful stories of like entire childhoods ruined because the psychiatrists are giving these sensitive, awake children one medication after another, when, in order to conform them to a normal life in a single family home, in a school, in like the straitjacket of modern culture. Like the proliferation of children like this, and of the need to medicate people into compliance. This is just one, I mean, ecological is another one. Like, this is just one sign that it's not working. It's not supposed to be this way. So if we can face that, and the grief that comes from that, and the fear of the unknown, then maybe we'll be open to learning from all the things that have been pushed aside to the margins. And just in general, anybody who's not fully indoctrinated into the cult of modernity, into the cult of the market, into the world of money, is going to have some knowledge of how to be human. And that could be, racial minorities, ethnic minorities, people in prisons. Like I've met some incredible people in prisons. Just like I'm like, wow, we could draw our political leadership from the prisons and we'd be way better off. Because man, these men have gone through a fire and come out like pure, So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Anything to add, Sebastian?
Well, thank you. No, I mean, perhaps one thing that comes to mind is because I couldn't stop thinking about, they just wouldn't buy when I was starting to talk about, how I really valued their way of life, for example, let's say in Brazil, and they would be like, no, but you got it all. Like you have, you're so lucky and all of this, and I was like, yeah, I mean, there are good sides, I'm not saying that it's all bad, that Norway is all bad, but it's how can we aid them, third world countries, so-called, to find their own path and to kind of do their own thing.
Yeah. This is I've thought about this a lot too, because you can't just go there and say, well, don't develop, don't become rich like us, because I mean, they've been shown, like through Hollywood and through all kinds of propaganda, and it's not just that. Like I wrote an essay called "The Banquet of Whiteness," kind of about this, which says that if you're living in a totally monetized world, then it's certainly better to have money than not to have money. But it would be even better to have a world that isn't totally monetized. Like if you're gonna have, if the only way to feed your family is by working for the global extraction machine, then it's better to have a job doing that than to have no job at all. And more people have a job doing that in Norway than in Brazil. So Norway's better off. So like, you can't just say, don't be like us, if you continue to maintain a system where only those like us can thrive. And that gets back to the debt machine and all that. But one thing I did when I was in Brazil, when I was in India, like I would be like, guys, let me tell you what it's really like. The chronic disease, like the obesity, the depression, the alienation. And by the way, every time I mention obesity, I just want to add that this is not like a judgment that says that if you are overweight, that it's due to a personal failing and so forth. Okay. I just want to put that in there. Okay. Because like that's one of the ways that dehumanization is kind of permitted in our society. It's okay to blame fat people for being fat, and think that they're greedy and can't control themselves or something. That's not the way it is. Anyway, so I would say in India and Brazil, I mean, like in Brazil, I was walking through the favela with this guy, Bruno, beautiful guy, they're doing incredible work there. And I'm like, man, like everybody who walks past you in the street says hi and smiles and knows you, and you know their name. And you can tell me a story about every single person you see. And look at those kids out there playing in a group, kicking that soccer ball around. Like everybody knows each other. Like in a neighborhood in America, there are no kids playing outside. They're all indoors and neighbors don't even know each other. And if you need help with something, you have to pay for it. No one's going to help you. Your neighbor's not going to help you. And I just described like the social disintegration and the alienation. And Bruno was like, man, that sucks. And he meant it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Sebastian. Hope to convene with you soon. Nice to meet you. Thank you, Charles. And when you talked about leadership coming from prison, immediately Nelson Mandela came to mind. I wonder if he will be the same president as he was after the prison, without that 30 years in prison.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. This thing about Patsy, like you grew up in a place and a time that would have been considered like poverty, right? Dirt floors, no refrigeration, like et cetera, et cetera. But your childhood was like, I mean, kids were outside barefoot running around, right? I mean,
yes, it's a very peaceful society, really. Yeah. And yeah, at another day, we can talk about my perspective and my experience with how modern humanities penetrate slowly and how it affects the or the underdeveloped third world country that I knew of when I was little.
Yeah, guys, Patsy has so many incredible stories. Someday I'm going to drag her in front of a camera and
someday. Yeah. Okay. So right now, interestingly, I am presenting a question for our sweet beloved friend Nori from Japan. So Nori was originally scheduled for this time, but she has a sweet responsibility that she was feeling very difficult to not fulfill, and then she chose that instead. That was to deliver her mother's homemade rice ball to train station to homeless people, because homeless people will go to public train station to sleep overnight, and at 5:30, 5 o'clock, when train begin to run again, they'll get chased out of the train station. So her 83 years old mother would go there to deliver rice balls, and she helps. So right now it's like 5:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and that's where she's at right now, and she's probably listening to us. So she asked me if I could read her question here for her, and her question is relating our nurturing our children. So this is what she wrote. I feel that before facing disempowerment as adults, we experience in many forms as children. Rejecting parenting advice, such as allowing a child to say, quote, cry it out, unquote, from infancy, I was determined to honor that voice and encourage it to its full capacity. Through that practice, we notice that our child's voice has since been a barometer for what rules are reasonable for us to impose, and has determined our parenting style as we take it into account in family decisions that, to an extent, it might seem extreme to some. We also notice by being open about such issues as our financial limitations, health concern, social values, etc., has also been important in helping our child be creative about ways to satisfy her needs and determine from a relatively young age what kind of requests are reasonable. As a result, we make significant life adjustments and what may be considered to be sacrifices. But I feel our life as parents and members of family and society have been able to serve valuable lessons to others about what it means to lift up the voices and rights of children. In observing our child's positive development, it leads me to these questions. So there are 5 questions. Is it okay that I read them all, Charles? Or do
Yeah,
you-
go ahead. Yeah, I already have some thoughts, but yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Is it possible that all justice is it possible that all justice start with the disempowerment of children? And the second is, would not justice best be served by raising our children with more involvement in creating the version of a more beautiful world? And the third is, how can we raise advocacy for the voices of children in society? Fourth, is it ultimately up to parents and child educators? Five, how do we engage others outside those roles to help us empower children?
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you, Nori, for sending these questions, and thank you for your precious participation on NAS. Yeah, you just bring so much light, and I'm not just saying that. So, yeah, I do think that a lot of our social dysfunction does originate in how we treat children, which then becomes the template for how authority treats adults and how we treat each other. It's not that children should be treated as adults, but it's that they should be treated as fully human. And certain ways, certain like common, almost norms of modern parenting are practice for dehumanization. And like, for example, protecting children from every possible danger and not letting them make their own choices. That doesn't mean that you allow a 2-year-old to run out into the street and get hit by a car, because that's a threat that is beyond his understanding. But maybe it does mean that you allow the 2-year-old to climb up onto a table and stand at the edge, even though he could fall off, because that's a risk that is not beyond his understanding. Do you want to be protected from every possible risk by somebody who thinks they know better what risk you should take and what risk you shouldn't take? Do you want to be treated like that? Probably not. You'd probably like to make your own decision about, is it too risky to learn surfing or to ride a bicycle or something like that? You'd like to make your own choice. Well, if that's the case, then we should allow children to make their own choice too. And for me, it's just like I constantly remind myself, this is a full divine human soul that I'm talking to right now. Yeah, that's the basic principle, and how that plays out in different situations, that would be a much longer conversation. But I'll just give one little story. I love to tell a story because it's about sweet little Matthew. Our Matthew, you might remember this, Patsy, when I gave him a knife when he was like 3. And I said, Matthew, this knife is sharp. If you're not careful, you'll cut yourself. So what happened? Do you remember? He cut himself, right. And he learned that knives are sharp and that maybe you should listen to dad, So I didn't protect him from any possible injury, because I wanted him to know that I trusted him to be smart, to be careful. And I don't know, nowadays Matthew has profound disagreements with me about what is smart and what is careful, but I'm proud of him, that he's a man who thinks for himself. And I know that, one of us is probably wrong. We can't both be right about our disagreement, but it's okay, because I know that he thinks for himself and he'll be able to navigate if he's the one who's wrong. And I pray that if I'm totally wrong about everything, that I will also have the fortitude to see that eventually. Or maybe there's some larger paradigm that encompasses both of our views. So anyway, yeah, sometimes I think about creating an online course about parenting. It's just like, it's the same hesitation I have about any online course. It's like, who am I having made so many mistakes, and I could bring in some experts and people I admire. And I don't know, maybe it would be based on my mistakes, because I've had 4 children, which means lots of opportunities to make mistakes and learn from them. Mm-hmm. So anyway, thank you, Nori. And
yeah. Thank you, Nori. And Charles, really, I learned, in fact, mistakes are lessons, and one of the most valuable lessons that I have taken, actually it's in a form of workshop, is learning, becoming more aware of how I have been using the dehumanizing methods with my children. Oh, I just love that. When I took that course, it revealed to me our old model of parenting is based on dehumanization, and how I was able to break out of that. So I'm forever grateful for that lesson, or that workshop.
Right. Or one of the actually another thing I'll mention is the pervasive use of shame and conditional acceptance to control children. Kind of intimidating them or scaring them into submission, or using phrases like, what's wrong with you? And why did you do that? And that's inexcusable. And how could you? Because you're teaching them self-hatred, teaching them self-rejection. You're like, with your enormous parental authority. I mean, if you remember how big, like literally huge a parent is, and how you are programmed to totally trust them, and they're saying, you are bad. Like, that is a primordial form of dehumanization. And maybe Nori's right. Maybe that is like the root of it all. If we stopped doing that, boy, I think society would be very different.
Yeah, like shaming right now, the shaming, blaming, dehumanization in the adult world definitely is rooted from there, because I personally don't witness our children use those methods at all. I don't. Maybe they do it outside of our family. I don't know, but I don't see that. So anyway, thank you, Nori, and love to the children of the world, all of you. So now, are you ready, Charles, for us to bring up? We're over time, but
yeah.
Todd and John, they say they're gonna be quick. So shall we?
Okay, let's do it. Let's do it quick. I thought we were done, but yeah, let's do quick. Yeah.
So Todd, you're up.
Yes, hi, Charles. I think this will be quick because a lot of this has been asked and answered already. And but I'll just jump right in. Examples of diversity training, corporate white fragility seminars, LGBTQ in the armed forces, a Black man now at the head of our military in the United States, women stepping into roles in the corporatocracy formerly held by men. All of these seem to be our culture, our system's way of a response to Black Lives Matter, the Me Too movement, and other social movements that could be serving as awakenings and opportunities for internal and communal shifts, but instead are being usurped by the patriarchy in a kind of woke washing that leaves the oppressed worse off than before and allows the elite to pat themselves on the back, or maybe I should say ourselves on the back, and look at how diverse our boardrooms are as they build weapons, poison food, and destroy ecosystems that harm and kill mostly women, Black and brown people. As Chris Hedges says, diversity only in terms of those willing to serve the system. My question is, how do we, as an imperialist culture, offer amends, genuine remorse for our colonial past, and reparations while we evolve, or maybe hospice, the systems and structures that hold those oppressions in place?
Well, that's a big question there, Todd.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have some ideas about how, but maybe I'll just say, and I say this a lot, that it's no victory for feminism or racial justice to simply diversify the ruling clique if they are going to continue to do the kinds of things that they do today. In fact, I mean, look at, someone like Margaret Thatcher. She was just as warlike and bellicose as her male predecessors, if not more. Destroying unions, and just and unraveling the social net, and where you could, look at Condoleezza Rice, or there's so many examples of diversity in the seat of power, doing what anyone in the seat of power must do to be in the seat of power. So really, when we're talking about undoing white supremacy, it's not about changing the skin tone of the supremacy. It's about a world that isn't about supremacy. It's a different way of engaging life that has been, it so happens, held outside the dominant culture. But it's not about necessarily, so it's not about bringing people from outside the dominant culture into domination. It's about bringing our culture, it's about releasing the hold of our culture altogether. And so the value of bringing in, say, an indigenous person isn't, the as a token of diversity. It's as a token of saying, okay, we're done with this, and maybe you know something about how to run a society or how to be human. It's a much bigger work than merely surface level diversity. And you're right, surface level diversity can actually perpetuate. It makes it look like we're doing our work here, but we're actually, creating a facade. Yeah. And we had one more, John, was it?
And yes, please, John, invite John up. And I did a chat on the live chat box. People said that, oh, Charles, if you're not too tired, yes, please bring John up. So let's bring John up. Are you too tired, Charles?
No, I'm not tired.
Okay, so that's
People might be tired of listening to us, but
okay.
Yeah.
You might be tired of listening to me.
Hey, John.
Hi, Charles. I'll try to keep it quick then. There was quite a bit of a story attached to this, but I will just go to the question, I think. I think most of what you've talked about touches my own kind of personal story. Yeah, but it's more about what you mentioned before about intimidation and shame. Yeah, we had an experience for the last 2 years where there's a housemaid that lives down the road who's living with a family who's very wealthy, and it turns out that she's been very oppressed, and she lives this double life where she's already had a family at home. she's 40 years old and she's had 6 children. And she came over to Vienna 20 years ago to basically keep her family alive. And she spends all her money, what she makes, transfers her money back home so that they can live. But through a situation that occurred where we started walking the dog of this wealthy family, because we noticed that it was being neglected, we got to know and befriend the housemaid. And over periods of months, she became open. It took a long time, but we became friends, and slowly we heard her story. And it was the question of what's it like to be you that really changed it for us, because we tried many things, including some kind of not force, but more pressurizing techniques with the family to try to release this dog, actually, but it never worked. And yeah, through the desperation, I actually went on to your course, the Metaphysics and Mystery. And through that, I learned a lot about myself, and then applied the kind of thinking to her situation. And through that, we got to know the much deeper causes of some of the symptoms that we were seeing. And yeah, we've become very good friends. And we've tried to help her in many different ways. But one thing that came from it is this deep-rooted fear in the oppressed. So she, for example, is very fearful of saying anything. Also very fearful of anyone knowing about her situation. And she, she has to request to actually go outside the house, and all these things. So it's very domineering environment. So my question really was about the fear. How can we create a safe space that allows people to tell their stories, to pursue that truth, knowing that they feel loved and safe?
Okay. In this situation, I wouldn't try to translate that into a general social question. How do we in general, like, this is a fated relationship, like, that you are in. Like, this person was put in your life, and your it's not just you, right? It's your roommates and stuff. And she was put in your life, you were put in hers. Like, this is, in Chinese we call it yuan fan. It was kind of destined to happen. And the story, I'm sure everybody here can feel the story, and can feel this woman, and can feel the millions of others like her. I mean, what is it like to not be able to feed your 6 children, and to have to say goodbye to them and never see them for months and years? To go to a foreign country, to be thinking about them every day, to be crying in your pillow, to be afraid of getting caught so that you get sent back and you can't even, feed them anymore. I mean, like, this story has been told, or has transpired, so many times in so many variations. And here it is, touching your life, and now touching our lives, and reminding us of what's real. This kind of thing happens because of dehumanization. She's a nanny, she's a housemaid, she's in some category, and the people who employ her have various ideas that license them to treat her as less than fully human, and make her have to get permission to go outside. And, I think in this situation, you just got to be really practical. And how can you actually help her? Especially, maybe if you pressure her employer, it might be counterproductive. Maybe you have to just be like a really cheerful, positive presence for the employer. so that you get to be in the house and you get to walk the dog, and the employer feels good when you're around. And maybe the employer feels good, they feel a little bit more generous. I'm not saying that this is what you should do, but it's the way to think. Like, how can I be in service to this human being who's been put here in my life? And not to necessarily have to write it into a big, into like a general social issue, but, and also, yeah, to embrace the feeling that you have that this relationship is important. Yeah, you're muted, so you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's been 2 years now, so we've done what we can to help her to as much as we can, help her to get home sometimes. And yeah, I mean, it's been a crazy journey. I could write a book about it. But the destiny, like you say, is definitely, this would have come up maybe in a different form if we had not taken this one on. I'm sure it's for us there to be seen. But the story with the dog was also incredibly emotional. Yeah, so we will continue because I don't think it doesn't feel like we can come away from this right now. But
yeah, I lived in Taiwan for 9 or 10 years of my life, and I don't know, maybe there's a past life thing, but I've come to have a very deep Confucian understanding of things. Not that it's the only way I look at things, but from the Confucian perspective, society ain't gonna change. There's always going to be the rich and the poor, and it's been kind of set up this way by heaven, not because it's right, but because this is the phase of humanity that we're in right now. And you're, as a relatively privileged person, your job is to discharge the duties of your station in the most humane and ethical way possible. So if you're going to be a rich man, you're supposed to be a really good, humane rich man. If you're going to be a poor man, you're supposed to be a really good, humane poor man, and to live out that role to the best of your ability, and not necessarily to escape that duty by trying to change society when it's not going to be changed. And paradoxically, by discharging your station very well, very humanely, ultimately that does change the system. But it's like accepting what has been put in your hands. Because sometimes the way that people who do launch social movements, often it starts with just one person, and then it grows into an activism. But it starts with it starts very, very close to home. And I don't know, I'm assuming a lot here, and I guess I just want to say that yeah, make it important. Like, you already want to make it important. You already know it's important.
Yeah, and there's no question that it's important somehow. One thing that the maid said is that the love that we've shown through the dog has somehow trickled through into the family, and even kind of just small kind of incremental lovingness is kind of flowing through somehow, breaking up the anger and the shame. So
yeah,
maybe something's happening.
You volunteer to walk the dog, and instead of like, shame on you, you're not walking the dog, so I'm going to do it, and put you to shame. You could come with thank you for letting me walk your dog.
Yeah.
And this actually ties into racial healing in a way, and any kind of healing where there's a victim-victimizer dynamic. Are we willing to accept healing in which the perpetrators never get punished, never never admit how wrong they were? Are we willing, if that is required? Are we willing to accept that? Now, I'm not saying that it has to be that way, but it's a question that asks us, what's the most important thing? Vengeance or healing?
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, John. And
thank you so much for the time. Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
So thank you, Charles. This is really amazing. The vengeance or healing. And I want to say that, like, to make real change, we all need a lot of courage and bravery, and be really willing to try something different, try something new, like such as radical compassion, or find a buddy, like I have buddies that I work out situations, like what does radical compassion look like in applications in this particular difficult situations, and that kind of bring us to the purpose of how we create a new and ancient community. We are a online community, not to replace our physical relationship. It's like we don't see ourselves as a social media platform, but it's like a sacred place for us to learn and practice, joining hands in learning how to be radical, compassionate, humane being in order to serve our exterior world. That's my feeling.
Thanks, Patsy. And thanks, everybody. I guess we'll I don't know, Patsy, do you want to announce anything? We do this every month, so
yes, we do
back.
this every month. And if you are curious about this community is about, please go to charleseisenstein.org and read some essays. And there's one essay, it's called "We Can Do Better Than This," and you can see if you resonate with all the ideas that this website has presented to you. And if you do, of course, you're welcome to request to join us. Thank you. See you all soon.